What does a contraction feel like? How do I know if I'm in labor? And what does the day of labor look like? Wait, is this normal? Hey, I'm Heidi Campbell, a certified birth doula, host of this podcast, Birth Story, and owner of My Doula Heidi. I have supported hundreds of women through their labor and deliveries, and I believe that every one of them, and you, deserves a microphone and a stage. So here we are. Listen each week to get answers to these tough questions and more. Birth Story, where we talk about pregnancy, labor, deliveries, where we tell our stories, share our feelings, and of course, chat about our favorite baby products and motherhood. And because I'm passionate about birth outcomes, you will hear from some of the top experts in labor and delivery. Whether you are pregnant, trying desperately to get pregnant, I hope you will stick around and be part of this tribe. Episode 21. Today's episode is an international adoption story. We talk with Rachelle, and she and her husband Pete adopted 2 toddlers from Jinja, Uganda in Africa. Originally, they just planned for 1. So this is a really cool story on how they ended up with 2 children from the Kidron Valley Orphanage. I try to walk you through a step-by-step guide on where you might start if you're interested in international adoption and how it might go. This particular story is very near and dear to my heart as I was their adoption doula. And if you've been listening for a while, you know that I have a book coming out. A portion of the proceeds from each book sold are going to fund the teacher salaries at this beautiful orphanage in Jinja, Uganda. This story changed my life, and I hope it might change yours too. So, ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. She can interject, like, you know, when you hear a rap song and then someone's in the background, it's like, Big Papa, like, Junior Mafia, what? Like, she could do, like, shout out.
Yeah. Well, let's just go on that. So, Rachelle, right now, we're on the Birth Story podcast, and we have Rachelle that we're interviewing, but Big Papa in the background that she's referring to is my best friend Megan, who is co-hosting.
Good morning.
Today for the first time. So this is really exciting. Just let's give everybody that's listening a little background. This was a little bit of a hard week for me, and it was the first time I was going to be without my children for 8 days, which anyone who's listening and is pregnant is probably like, probably can't imagine that unless you have older children. But I was thinking, I don't know how I'm going to be away from my kids for 8 days, which now is like, we're all having kind of a good time without
only minimal fun
without our children. But my bestie Megan, since we were 10 years old from Florida, showed up on my doorstep. And there's an epic video on Instagram and Facebook of my reaction to this. So I have a co-host. Whoop, whoop.
Who might know more than a mother of 5?
Come on, Big Papa. Where's your whoop?
What's a good, birth word that she could blurt out in the middle of
every now and then? I just want you to say push.
Placenta.
Push it real good. So
no, there's no singing in this podcast.
In all seriousness, hello, everybody.
Hello.
On the podcast today, we are talking adoption. And what's really cool is I happen to have been Rachelle's doula for her birth, and her birth story is going to be featured in my book that's coming out. And so I'm really excited about that. But after she had 2 babies, she went on to adopt 2 more. So we have tons of questions for you. And we really want to honor all the ways in which we become parents, including through adoption. And so welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I will say we've already had our coffee. It's like really early in the morning and we've already had our coffee.
We're pretty amped up here.
We've worked out. We're having a pretty good mom day.
Yeah.
Winning. Rachelle, let's start at the very beginning. My beginning of this story was sitting on your couch, nursing our babies, and I was like, are you gonna have another one?
What did I say?
You were kind of already deep into the adoption. Like I just kind of was getting caught up. Yeah. And so start us at the very beginning. Did you always know you wanted to adopt?
I did not. I'd say the very beginning would be when, I'm sure you'll remember, we traveled back and forth to Africa doing ambassadors in sport. And when we went back the second time and had Pete with us, we went to that one orphanage that had the little boy with the vuvuzela. And every time he kicked the soccer ball, he would blow it. And I think that really was the first time Pete and I started talking about orphans and adoption and what it might look like to adopt from Africa.
I guess I should have probably started there. So Rochelle and I were, can I call ourselves international soccer players?
I think it's fair.
Yeah. So we played on an international soccer team.
We did play a national team. I don't remember who it was, but I scored on them.
No, we played against the women's national team in South Africa.
Yeah.
I know this is a Birth Story podcast, but this all is relevant. So Rochelle and I were international soccer players. We went and played with ambassadors in sport. And a year later, after when we had worked in all of these orphanages and like some prisons, we're just kind of covered in children. It was
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. I mean, it was really an amazing, you'd walk into an orphanage and they were just, we were covered in children. It was so beautiful. I mean, they just wanted to touch our skin and our hair was so different.
They would chant, me next or me now. I can't remember. And they'd want to just keep jumping on you. And there was like 100 lined up waiting.
To just touch and be held. And so I was wondering if it was on the first trip or the second trip. So a year later.
The seed was probably planted early.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like you were kind of in your groove. And a year later, we decided to come back. But we decided to bring like everyone we knew that played soccer. Epic. It was kind of epic because it was the 2010 World Cup.
Oh, yeah, it was also World Cup. Let's not.
Yeah, I was like, it was 2010 World Cup. So we kind of went back to South Africa with all of our soccer playing friends on that trip. On the way there, tell everybody
I got engaged.
Yeah.
It was the best day. We always joke, we're like, not the wedding, not having kids. It was the best day of my life because on that same day, we got engaged in Madrid on like, I don't know what you call that, a layover, a very long layover. It was a day-long layover. And then I remember arriving and everybody was already at the stadium and we came to meet you guys and we were like totally done up with all the face paint. And I just remember you being like 20 rows up yelling, Rachelle! And you were like wanting, and I held up my hand with the ring and you were like, yes!
I was like, yes!
And then Landon Donovan scored the most amazing goal ever.
I was like, wait, we cannot do this podcast without honoring Landon Donovan's goal.
We should have named our first Landon.
Oh, it was such an incredible soccer match in overtime. It was, I mean, I don't think my body has ever shook like that. It was the most
amazing thing ever. And if you're not a soccer fan, you're probably like, what are you talking about?
So on this trip, we went to this one particular orphanage and we have some pictures I'll put up on our Instagram and Facebook feed of this little boy with the vuvuzela.
Yeah, I have his picture hanging in our house.
It was just so incredible. And we did a lot of dancing and a lot of singing and a lot of playing and a lot of touching and a lot of holding with many orphans. And so the seed was kind of planted.
Yep.
So did you guys start talking about it or was it just kind of in your hearts? As you planned your wedding and having kids?
No, we actually did start talking about it. It was funny because that was one thing that always excited me or drew me to Pete was the fact that he wasn't scared to talk about serious things. Like before being engaged, we talked about having kids and the possibility of adoption. And then once we really, committed to each other and knew we were getting married, we full on discussed, what our family would look like often. And I think we knew from the start, even when having Brecken, that we were going to adopt down the road.
So did you always know that you wanted to have biological children first and then adopt next?
No, but I do think once we had Brecken, I knew I wanted to have one more at least before we adopted.
Okay. Was Brecken a planned pregnancy your first?
Yes.
Okay. So you have Brecken. How old is he?
7.
And then you have another
Tuck.
And how old is he?
The old Tuckster. He is 5.
Okay. 7 and 5. How old were they when you decided we are going to go for adoption rather than another biological child?
I think almost 4 and almost 2.
Okay.
So I guess that's 3 and 1.
Yes.
That's a fancy way to say it.
So when they were 3 and 1, sometime around there, we were sitting on the couch.
Yes.
Taking care of our babies. And of course, I asked the question no one should ever ask, like, when are you having another baby? Like right after.
It's the question no one should ever ask.
Yes, when you are nursing.
But Heidi will ask it.
Yes, so when you're holding, are you having another one? Yeah, I did ask that. And you were like, actually, we have started the adoption process.
Look at us.
So what is that? I mean, take me on that. I don't even know, like, what do you do? Do you call somebody? Do you get on the Googles?
All the things, all the technologies. We knew that we wanted to adopt, so we started researching, and we found out that a lot of the places, like a lot of countries in Africa, were closed down to adoption, or it was really limited. Like you could only adopt kids above a certain age or with special needs. So at first we had to whittle it down or figure out which countries were viable options to adopt from, because we did want to adopt at least with the first, a younger child. And so we found out that it was between Uganda and Ethiopia. And ironically, we were like, we'll go with Uganda because it's a shorter timeline. And then all of the laws changed. You'll hear about that midway through. So
at the time, it was easier to adopt from Uganda than it was from Ethiopia. But
Correct.
for the whole continent of Africa, Americans
could
at
adopt
the time,
from like Ghana, South Africa, Ethiopia, Uganda, and there might have been one more, but all the other places had to be special needs children of a certain age or above. And those were longer timelines as well.
Okay.
So as soon as we knew it was Uganda, we started looking for adoption agencies that had a program for Uganda. And so the very first one I found that I really liked and had looked over all the information on the webpage had a webinar that night when I was looking, and I was like, oh my gosh, like let's check this out tonight. So I remember logging in, and Pete and I like nerdily sitting up against the laptop, like listening and asking questions here and there. And we pretty much got all of our questions answered. And there were other families on the, is that even the right word? Now it might be like a Moodle, or it was a webinar, I think. And then at the end of it, we closed the computer and talked a little, went to bed. And the next morning we were like, so you ready to do it? And we're both like, yep. And so I just called and started the process, which is a lengthy one because, you know, there's a lot of paperwork. And the very first thing we had to start on immediately was our home study. So that takes about 4 to 6 months to do a home study where you have like a social worker who comes and visits your home. There's tons of like background checks, and they want to, you know, meet your children and learn about everyone that's in the household and what your values are. And you write like an autobiography about your family, and you trace back your own history of like how you grew up and what your parenting beliefs are and all this stuff.
There's a lot of psychology involved in it.
Yes.
Okay, so let's pause, rewind. If someone is listening to this podcast and they have a seed inside of them for adoption, what would you recommend be the starting point, regardless of where they're going to adopt? But we're specifically addressing international adoption today. So where would someone start? How do you get to a webinar?
Yeah, the very first thing you're going to have to do is go online and find different agencies that would be a good fit for you. And so some are religion-based and some aren't. And some are, like ours happened to be local and was within our state. But you really can adopt, like if you had, you know, you were East Coast and you saw a California adoption agency that met all of the needs, they had a program you liked and you lined up with the values and the timelines looked good, you could still use them. Okay. And so you really just need to find an agency that has the program you're looking for. So like I say that because ours, our agency ended up adding 2 other countries, like Burundi is one they just added. And so it's always changing, like the countries that you can adopt from.
Let's play a game. Oh. Where in the world is Burundi? Who knows? Tell me.
I'm going to take a guess it's in Africa, but I don't know which part.
North,
East?
south, east, west, middle?
I've got a 1 out of 4 chance east.
I was just wondering how smart we were at this room.
Oh, we're not. That's not.
Push button over here.
We all just did a thumbs down.
So the first step would be find an adoption agency. With the adoption agency, like I'm assuming you have to have a lawyer.
Okay.
Is the lawyer...
Like me personally?
Yeah.
Or did the agency? I didn't have to have a lawyer.
You didn't have to have a lawyer.
No, but really the first thing I did, that was like a lie. I talked to other people who had adopted and really picked their brain about certain things and what the home study was going to be like and things like that. Okay. Then I went and found an agency. Okay. We did not have a lawyer. You end up getting a social worker and like a case manager.
Oh, okay. It feels like something legal to me.
Feels very legal.
But this is good. This is why we're doing the podcast. It's not as legal as
it gets legal later.
Okay. Later.
Say that 5 times fast. Legal later.
Legal later. I can't do it.
Come on, Megan. Say it. Push.
This is so good. Okay, so
Placenta.
step one in international adoption, find mentorship, a tribe, a group, maybe like on Facebook or Instagram, follow some hashtags, get a group of
definitely.
people that can talk to you
Yes,
about what
for
their
sure.
experience was like. Later, I'm going to ask you, are you now a mentor for other people? But we're on this podcast, so I guess the answer is yes. Then get on Google and or Yahoo or whatever your
And you can ask the
Bing,
people
whatever
you've
it is of
talked to.
choice.
Like people suggested the one that I was researching.
Okay, that's always like a really credible
Yes.
source
Yes.
for referrals. But find an agency that fits you.
Yes, because
Okay.
there's so many nuances and little things you have to know, and only an agency is going to be able to tell you all of those things.
And then what I heard from you was buckle down and
Yep.
prepare for months of
Correct.
paperwork and
Yes.
home study.
And they tell you that, and you think you know it, but it's really difficult because your end goal is like you want to adopt this child, and it's almost like for at least 6 months you can't even really consider. Well,
Are they
What that-
alive? Have they been born
yes, you
yet?
don't even know.
You know. So what was the age range that you were desiring to adopt?
We applied for birth to 2.
Birth to 2. And did
they-
you care about the sex of the baby?
So that is, they ask you all these different questions, and that goes into your home study. So they ask if you want multiple siblings, what gender, are you okay with disabilities? And we said, yes, we're okay with disabilities, birth to 2. I think we might have specified that we preferred a male, but we're open.
Okay. So then what happens?
If you're doing
when you're done,
international-
like 4 to 6 months of this home study and this work.
Celebrate.
Yeah.
No,
Then what happens?
As soon as you're done, if it's going to be international, then you need to immediately start getting all of your documents. There's 2 things for immigration, because you need to get approved to be able to bring a child home. And at this point, I've literally it's almost like birth. I've blacked it all out. I don't remember the form numbers and all that, but there's forms you fill out and you get approval. And at the same time, you submit something called a dossier, which is basically the fact that your home study is done. They submit many copies, notarized copies of your home study, along with a gazillion documents of like your finances and your background checks. And depending what country, like ours, religion was a part of the criteria. Like you had to have a letter from your pastor and things like that.
Okay. Oh, I have so many questions. When did you have to pay money to someone first? Because I know adoption's not free, but like, do you right away have to pay this
The
agency
home study
money?
you do have to pay, and that money went directly to the social workers, not company, but like wherever they worked out of.
Okay.
You had to pay, and I want to say that was like $200 to $300. So not anything huge compared to what you would later pay.
And I want you to break that down for us because I want to be able to set realistic expectations for people that are listening on the financial. And then
So the real reason, it would be great to start with the agency is because they will send you a breakdown from start to finish with a timeline of how much it is total, but what each part's spent on and when it's due by. Adoption can cost even domestically anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 total. But then when you're going international and you incorporate travel, it can be around $60,000. And then if you have multiple, like for us, when we decided to adopt Priscilla, it just essentially doubled it, minus a few things that you only pay one time. So
okay. So we'll get to the money stuff later, but just let's kind of throw it out there. Overall, start to finish, what did it end up costing to adopt 2 children from Uganda?
a guess for me that's pretty close would probably be $85,000 to $90,000.
Okay, and that includes all your plane tickets and everything.
That includes everything. I'd say the actual fees would probably have been maybe like $50,000 to $60,000, but then all the flights and the court and we had to pay to foster them, so we paid money every month.
Yeah.
Because you had to foster them for a certain period of time, so you had to pay for all of their food, clothes, medical,
education,
school. Yeah.
Okay, so take a deep breath, everybody that just heard that number, right? Because Rachelle, what do you do for a living?
I'm in education.
And what does your husband do for a living?
He's in social work and nonprofit.
Okay, so a teacher and a nonprofit social worker found a way to get $85,000 to $90,000 to bring their 2 beautiful children home. And one of the things I want to talk about later in the podcast is creative and generous fundraising.
Yes, please don't let money stop you. If you want to do it, it will not be an issue.
The money will come. I was going to say that's just one thing I want to ring cheers from. I'm on the outside, I've never adopted, but being part of watching you guys do this is watching people show up with generosity and wanting to really contribute to make this possible for anyone,
Yes.
regardless of what your baseline finances
Yes,
are.
I want to emphasize that. Do not let money be
Yeah.
the restriction or the reason you don't do it.
So let's go get to the good stuff. So the home study's done.
Yes.
And at what point did you know it was going to be Uganda and
my gosh.
possibly like how did that matching?
You're taking me back now to places I have not traveled in a while in my mind. So
which interject, you mentioned earlier that this is kind of like being pregnant and birth. And let's honor that for anyone who is adopting or has adopted and has never given birth. It is so similar.
Yes.
Like the process of trying to get pregnant and then the process of being pregnant.
the
and
joy
then
of being matched is like finding out you are pregnant and like what the sex is
and never knowing what day you're going to go into labor
or what the outcome will even be.
Exactly. There are so many parallels to the adoption process
Yes.
to just labor. It's like becoming a parent is becoming a parent.
Yep.
And it's a journey, you know, and
Correct.
And it looks very different for everybody, but there are so many parallels. I know you said you've blacked out some of it.
It's coming back slowly
Okay.
but surely. So here's
Drink
what
some more
happened
coffee.
next. Yep, I'm just going to keep going with the coffee. So they, this is what they say they do, and I remember being like, how could they really do this? And I was telling someone this the other day. It's so funny. They take your autobiography, like the story you wrote about your life and your family, and then they had, for us in our agency, they had 5 different orphanages that they worked with in Uganda. And they said, we're putting your story out there to these different places, and they know what kids they have available right now, and they try very hard to make a really great match between family and child. And I thought, birth to 2, like how are you gonna... I feel like it's a little like just throwing, a dart at a board, like, we'll give them this kid. But I really cannot emphasize how well they do this, because not only do I feel like the child they referred us was a perfect match for our family, but also all of the families I met adopting and their children, I was like, oh my gosh, like it makes perfect sense. Like that child goes so perfectly with that family and probably, wouldn't have been the best fit in our family. And so I don't know how they do that, but they referred us a child.
But their little personalities
Yes.
come out so
true.
so quickly.
Because could you see Jordan really with any other family? I mean,
No. Mm-mm. We're going to get to Jordan in a little bit, and that little spitfire personality. Let's talk about when you... these 5 orphanages get your information and they make the match. Now, how did you find out that they matched you?
So there's a lot of conversation between the agency and your caseworker who knows you so well at this point, and the orphanage, like the person that runs it and makes those decisions. They wrote me and said, hey, we've been talking with this one orphanage that has the perfect match for you. And they said it could be any time in the next few weeks that we're going to email you your referral. And basically what that is kind of like when you go and you find out the sex of your child, like they tell you who the child is, they send you a picture, and then they give you all the like medical background or any information they have on the child and their story of like how they came to the orphanage.
Okay. So you're like, this is happening.
So I remember being at school and I was like, oh my gosh, I think an email is coming in. I was like, not sure if I wanted to check it because I wasn't with Pete. And then of course I did check it. And then it said, meet Jordan Mukisa. And I was like, should I click on it? I do want to meet Jordan Mukisa. And the second I clicked on it and saw that little booger, I was just like, oh my gosh. It's like it all becomes so real right then. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they sent you a current photo.
Oh, this is all so funny because let's go back to, we requested birth to 2. So they really need to refer you a child. And keep in mind, the older a child gets, the less likely they are to be adopted. So really orphanages know the niche, or like this little time period is in the first 2 to 3 years that they can probably really get the child adopted to a family. And so if a child were to be, and it's all real loosey-goosey, there's no like birth certificates or whatever, but if a child could be less than 24 months old, then they match your home study paperwork and the immigration paperwork that you have, and you can bring them home. But if a child were to be referred to you and it said 26 months old, you can't bring that child home because you weren't approved for someone over 2 at referral.
Okay.
So Jordan, they told us, was right under that 2-year-old mark, luckily. And so we're really unsure exactly how old he was, but we got pictures that were fairly current. And then we knew he was somewhere around like 1 year and 10 months old.
Okay. Now let's address this.
Does he really not have a birth certificate? No.
Oh,
they
great
don't-
question. Push button. Let's start with push.
You mentioned earlier that there was no birth certificate.
It is very antiquated there.
So you don't know his actual birthday and age.
Correct. Like most kids there are no formal documents, and they do a lot of like, we know they were born in the last rainy season. And you're like, okay, great. That's a range. So with him, I actually think his birth date was pretty spot on because he was abandoned a few days after birth. So they could pretty much pinpoint it. But like with Priscilla, it was, not a random guess in the dark. But I mean, I think we're off by many months.
Okay. So let's talk about Jordan's birth story. Like,
Okay.
what do we know about what Jordan's life was like before you got this email with a picture of him?
I think that's the hardest part. I don't know a lot. He was abandoned on a Sunday in a little patch of grass by the stairs of this very tiny church in Buganda, not to be confused with Uganda. It was Buganda in Uganda. And they heard a baby crying, and they all come out, after service, and there was nobody there. Fast forward a little bit, I went to visit this place and stood in the exact patch of grass holding Jordan that he had been abandoned in. And it was the most powerful moment for me. I went around the whole town and took pictures. And when we were standing there, this group of women was cooking around a fire and ran over. And they were the women that were there that originally found him that day and were asking, is this Jordan? And wanted to see him and hold him. And so, they do everything they can, newspaper ads. I'm saying it's old school. They go around with like a megaphone in a van with a picture of him and ask everyone in the town and surrounding areas, but nobody came forward. And so the pastor ended up taking him into his home, which did not end up being a good thing.
Let's talk a little bit about birth statistics in Uganda. Like, what are some of the possibilities of why there are so many orphans in Uganda? And like, what, if we can speculate or guess as to what happened to Jordan's mom and dad, or mom or dad, then what that might be.
And it's so hard because the one thing I remember them telling us, you do also, just side note for you guys that want to adopt, you have to take a certain number of hours of classes online. And I remember them saying like, so I'll speculate, but when you're talking to the child, they said only stick to facts. Don't ever tell them something about their parents that you're not 100% positive of. And so I really don't know anything, but it could be possible that the mom and dad were not together and that the mom could not handle, because of illness or money, raising the child. It could have had something to do with a lot of people hide their pregnancy, and then there's like a sense of shame around getting pregnant and having a child. So if they can hide it and then get rid of the child, no one would really know.
I was going to read some stuff here.
Oh, please.
I did some research.
You did research?
Well, yeah, because we're going to get to some future stuff.
Let's stick with some facts at this day and time in our social landscape.
Well, let's just talk a little bit. And again, I'm opening up my book, Birth Story.
Oh.
That's coming out.
Is that what that is?
But Uganda's maternal mortality rate is one of the highest in the world. 1 woman out of every 49 do not survive their pregnancy and or their delivery.
I believe that, yep.
33% of girls will give birth by the time they're 18 years old.
100% believe that.
38% of the population is infected with malaria each year, with over 1,000 deaths. Both of your children had malaria
more than one time, yeah, while I was there.
And your husband.
And my husband, yeah.
Multiple times, but thankfully they were able to get treatment.
Yep.
But there are 11,000 deaths in Uganda a year.
Yeah, you need to get treated immediately.
Yeah, so 6% of the population is HIV positive.
Yep.
Most of Ugandans make less than $1,000 overall, even with when you include the big cities, $1,000 a month. The average salary at the particular orphanage that you have adopted from, Kidron Valley, is $80 per month.
If you're a teacher, yep, and the caregivers are less.
Yeah. So these are just some of the reasons there are 2.5.
I was going to say it's the orphan capital of the world.
Yeah.
It's 2.5 million, I think.
2.5 million orphans. And so we don't know what happened to Jordan's mom. But there you are standing outside this church on that patch of grass, like holding your son, and the women in the village are coming around you. And at this point, they know that they're happy. And I'm
They're
assuming
so
they're
happy.
celebrating with you that this little
yes.
baby that they were concerned about now is on his way home.
Yep.
You know?
You know Jordan, he's the life of everything, every party, every day. And he just starts like giggling and dancing. And it was just this really joyful moment. And to see where he had gone, because I know he was 8.5 pounds at almost a year and a half old. And he really looked like a malnourished newborn when he was a year and a half, but was not fed regularly. And so the equivalent of DSS in their village, then they came and saw the state Jordan was in and took him.
And he was on the brink of death.
Yes.
At this point. And he was somehow
Taken to
the hospital, or was he taken to the
He was given to the
orphanage?
police, who brought him immediately to Kidron, and they sent me, before the actual arrival of Jordan and Priscilla in the U.S., they sent me this photo album of all these pictures from the first day they took him in, all the way throughout the years that I had never seen, because it was before I knew Jordan, and it was like the missing piece of the puzzle. Like I got to see his life for the first 2 years, so that he slowly started to be able to sit up. But when he was 1.5, 2 years old, he was just getting the strength to sit and have core strength and stand. He couldn't walk when I first met him, and he was almost 2.
Because at first he was abandoned. Next, he was completely neglected.
Yep.
And then he was
Brought to the orphanage
Brought
and
to the
slowly
orphanage.
nursed back to health.
okay. So we kind of jumped all around.
Didn't we, though?
Yeah, I know. Push.
I would like to know, yes, your first meeting with him. I'm
Oh
like
my
waiting for
gosh.
that. Like your
So we arrive in Uganda. I mean, first let's talk about, it is a day to 2 days of traveling, many, many flights, all 8 hours to here, 8 hours to that. You look disgusting. You finally arrive.
But you left your kids at home, right? It's just
Yes.
you and your husband?
Oh yeah, what kids?
Yeah, okay.
We're all on our own. Great time. And we arrive in Kampala, which is where you have to fly in Uganda, because there's one international airport. And then we're still 3 hours away from Jinja. So Big John, who leads the whole mission, is the one that picks you up. And he is just the best thing ever. And
You called him Big John. I met him as Pastor John.
yes. I don't call him Big John, but that's like how all of his emails to me. He's like, hello, I am Big John. I'll be the one picking you up. And he's the best thing ever. We ran, hugged him, and in all honesty, knowing him now and remembering the first trip, we get in the car and start driving, and Uganda is all red clay and bumpy roads. Nothing's paved. And so we're like, and there's no seatbelts. So we're like jostling all around. He is driving like 90 miles per hour, barely missing people on the side of the road. And then like he gets some phone call, which they all have cell phones. And he's like, sounds angrily talking with a man whose car he's driving. Then the car breaks down. We're in the middle of this city in the middle of the night with people like swarming the car. And it was so funny. So finally we drive the 3 hours. We get to where John lives. We sleep a little because it's like the middle of the night. And when we wake up in the morning, he takes us to the orphanage, which is this bright yellow building. And we come around the corner and they all are pointing and saying, Jordan's in there.
Now we're going to take a short break to just share a few things with you, and we'll be right back with our guest. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. I've got a really cool opportunity for you to hear your name on the Birth Story podcast, and that is by writing a review. So I was hoping that you might push pause right now, scroll down on your podcast app, hit a 5-star, and then click the write a review. Just a few sentences can mean everything. So let's listen to a couple. CLT Love. Love this podcast. It's everything and more that I needed to prepare for my VBAC. And then Paquita 720. This is an amazing podcast. I wish it was around when I was pregnant with my first, but we definitely listened to it with our second. Heidi is informative, fun, and inclusive to all clients she serves and interviews. She presents on diverse topics and interviews a variety of couples about their birth experiences, which I found so helpful to listen to. So thanks, CLT Love and Paquita 720. And on next week's episode, you might hear your own name if you take just a quick minute to write me a review. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, then I need your help to spread the word. If you know anyone who is pregnant, is trying to become pregnant or just loves a good birth story, if you could send them to iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or SoundCloud, wherever they listen to their podcasts, and ask them to subscribe to the Birth Story podcast.
We walk around the corner and Jordan comes like toddling, crawling, falling into my lap with the most insane giggle, like contagious, awesome laughter, and just rolled all over me. And it was like the best moment ever. And I just thought he was so, and little did we know, if I look back at pictures of it, that Priscilla was sitting directly next to him eating porridge, looking at us the whole time.
The whole time. Okay, so
Can I ask what the time frame was?
I'm so excited. Pushed her button.
What the time frame?
From when you got the email that you were placed with the child to when you had your first visit over.
Oh, so that part's awesome. It was really like 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. Like we went immediately after getting the referral.
Okay.
Because it had been over a year
Yeah,
since
at this
the
point,
process started, right?
Yeah.
So from the time you said, oh, I want to adopt, to the time you landed in Uganda was
Yes.
over a year.
And good question, Megan, because side note, right as we were accepting and we're meeting him is when the law changed, and all of a sudden they were saying we were supposed to go on one trip and meet him and stay for a few weeks and then come back and do the court process and bring him home. Well, right as soon as we had been referred and met him and knew he was ours, they said now the law changed. You have to foster him for a year before you can even think about going to court.
Like, so you've met this bubbly, cute, smiley Jordan, and he's yours, and you're there with him, and you're supposed to bring him home.
The next time, yeah.
And then they're like, oh,
Surprise.
sorry. I'm sorry you've paid all this thousands
And
of
then
dollars.
now I realize why everyone said international adoption, well, adoption in general, is like this crazy roller coaster ride.
So
You gotta
I'm
be ready.
assuming that you had a decision. Like you
Correct.
could be
we
like,
could have ended the referral.
sorry, Jordan, reverse.
Yep.
We're not going to do
There was
this.
no way that was happening, but yes.
Or you could have stuck it out, which
Yeah.
is what you guys did.
Changed my life. Yep.
So you decided that you were going to adhere to this new law.
Yep.
And foster your child in country
Yep.
for an entire year.
Yep.
And then you could start the paperwork process.
Best thing that ever happened to us.
Yeah.
And the most painful news to ever receive. But yep,
Yeah.
we did it.
You hung out with him.
Yep.
And you played.
So we had him for this whole first week, and it was not like, I don't want to paint a picture of it being blissful and perfect. We played, it was so much fun. And then, reality sets in. You literally go and have brought diapers, clothes, medicine in case he gets sick, and then they just hand him to you with a few pairs of scraggly, ripped clothes from the orphanage, and are like, here you go. And so all of a sudden, 24/7, you have this child, and you're staying in a new surrounding.
Because you leave the orphanage.
You leave the
You're
orphanage,
not staying
correct.
at the orphanage with him. You
Nope.
take him away from the orphanage.
Correct. And we stay, oh my gosh, I can't remember what they call it. It was Pastor John's guest house area. And yeah, everything's different there, right? Like we didn't have a mode of transportation, and we don't know how to get places, and we don't speak the language. We don't look like everybody else. So, it's a lot of new being thrown at you. And then you have this child who's so happy and it's so exciting. But then I'm like, oh my gosh, is he potty trained? Is he what can he do? What can't he do? At night, he's got these tantrums and rituals that I think he was used to doing to soothe himself to sleep. And now you've got this woman offering to hold you and rock you. And I just remember, I think it's good to be transparent. The first few nights, many times as I'm rocking him and he's crying, and I'm thinking, did I make a mistake? What if he doesn't love me? What if he doesn't feel that connection? Was all of this for nothing? And then you realize, no, silly.
Yeah.
It's just hard.
Yeah. How long did you stay in country the first time?
I think 3 weeks.
Wow. So you were with him for 3 weeks.
Yes.
And then because of this new law, you had to take him back to the orphanage.
Yeah, leaving and them ripping him, he would not let go, and bawling, and the sound of his crying when we had to leave was the most painful thing I've ever done.
Because
And that
you had
repeated
to-
every time we visited.
I'm going to say, because you had to drive back to the orphanage.
Correct.
And you had to
And then what message is that sending him, right? He's totally attached and been with us and feels safe.
And were you asked? You were saying mommy and daddy, and I'm mommy, this is daddy.
Immediately with
Yeah.
Jordan, he was, not to sound boastful, but he was obsessed with me. He swatted Pete away, and he called me mama immediately and didn't want to be, I think you guys know he was almost 2, but he really looked like a 10-month-old. You would hold him. He was the size of a little baby, and he would not do anything. Like he would not, we had to force him to try to start learning to walk and stuff because all he wanted to do was sit in my lap or on me and never wanted to be apart. So then taking him held.
Did you have a baby carrier or anything that you had just to carry him in and just be
I literally never put him down or had him off of me that first trip.
Yeah. Amazing. Now, one of the things I want you to share is they don't have traditional formula. So he was fed.
I wish I could even remember. It was like glucose and margarine or something.
Yeah. So they had to
It's not nutritional.
So they didn't, and there weren't wet nurses at the orphanage. And so they were, when he was first there, the bottles that they're given, I mean, this is a big need is what I'm trying to say. Like
huge need.
It's a huge need to be able to fundraise money for these orphanages, to be able to supply something as simple as
And it doesn't take a lot of money.
Yeah, because they're right now the children are getting these like sugar water, butter bottles that just really
something
aren't.
That fills them. But like, let's think, what do we know? Everything that's important in a child's life comes in the first few years. And so much of their brain and everything, language, all these things are formed in the beginning. And when they're not getting adequate nutrition, think of what that does to their potential in life, right?
And we always talk about like one small change, right? Like one small change that we can make as a tribe of people coming together is to be able to supply nutrition to infants.
So fundamental, right? Like everyone
to
deserves
infants
that.
and children, and that can change the world. So we're going to get a little bit more to the finances in the end, but I want to jump ahead a little bit. So this ritual
of going back and forth
then began because you had a whole year. So you had to then start going separate, right?
Yes, because we needed to maintain jobs to pay for the adoption, and we couldn't just...
And your other two children.
And we had to raise two children,
So you started going alone, then your husband Pete started going alone, and you guys started going every few months. So that you could go alternate. See Jordan, still build those relationships. On one of those trips, I was able to come with you.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk a little bit about our time together and how one became two.
Oh, yes.
So right before I joined you in Uganda, just as a friend and a support person, that since your husband couldn't go, different friends were trading back and forth on these trips. And you had found out that you could adopt a second child.
Yes.
And that was never really on the table. So now we're in this long waiting period, but there's a light.
Yes.
You can add on. So
it's a BOGO.
BOGO.
But it wasn't get one free.
So tell me about what that conversation looked like with you and Pete.
Yeah, we met this amazing couple that we will forever be entwined with, who was adopting two of Jordan and Priscilla's good friends and happened to be there at the same time as me on that trip and had added on. They were originally adopting one. And so when I started questioning them, like, oh, how did you end up with the second? They said, oh, we're originally adopting this one. And then we found out that we could, within a certain time period, add on a second. And so I started having that idea swirling in my mind, and I brought it up to Pete, and now I'm there without Pete. And so I think right about the time you were arriving, I was realizing that maybe adopting Priscilla, because it would be on the same timeline, like John let me know that if we did it, within a certain, like right from the beginning and didn't wait 6 months, that we could probably have Jordan and Priscilla go through the process together. And so I sent him a picture of me holding Priscilla and said, what do you think? And he said, she's beautiful. Oh my gosh, but I really want to adopt Priscilla. And I said, that is Priscilla. She just has dreads this time instead of cornrows. And like every time you went, her hair would be different. So like you could never tell. I was like, that is Priscilla.
That is so funny because she had gotten bigger.
Yes.
And her hair was different.
Cheeks.
And she was changing. From day one on your first trip, you had mentioned Priscilla was always next to Jordan.
Yes.
Like, so when you look back at
every
pictures and from these nurses that took them in at the beginning,
gosh, yes.
Jordan and Priscilla, later, we link back, were always together. Always next to each other.
Sleeping like an inch from each other. Yep.
At all times.
Always holding hands.
And Jordan attached to you very quickly.
Yes.
But on that very first trip, Priscilla had attached
obsessed with Pete.
To Pete.
Yes.
And so when you kind of found out, it was on the table.
Yep.
It was, if we could do this, we don't know how financially we're going to do this, but let's do this.
Which
right?
again is where I say, don't worry about the money because I didn't.
Yeah. Tell us about Priscilla's given name.
Oh, Docus.
And what does that mean?
Blessing from the sugarcane.
Okay. Because
she was abandoned in a sugarcane plantation when she was maybe 8 or 9 months was the guess.
But they weren't.
But we don't know.
No, for
and again,
sure.
no birth certificate or.
So you and Pete ended up having to pick a birthday for Priscilla
Yes.
and then pick a birthday for Jordan.
Yeah.
Based on these like guest timelines. Her given name was Docus, but everyone at the orphanage called her Priscilla.
Correct.
And everyone called Jordan Jordan.
Correct.
His given name was
Jordan Mukisa. Well, most kids had a English name and an African name, but for some reason Jordan didn't.
So you had Priscilla and Jordan, and you didn't have to change their names because those were their given English, you know.
Yeah, and they already had been going by him. And one thing I was always saying when you were asking Megan about meeting Jordan for the first time, like one of my first memories is just every caregiver came out and was like, they called him Jordani, and they would yell Jordani, and they sang this song Tumbala, Tumbala, and he would try to walk to them, and he just responded so happily to the chants of his name. I was like, I'm not going to change his name. And Priscilla was pretty much the same way. And just so you guys know, they also assign a mama to each baby, and so his was Juliet, and she was just like this amazing light in his life that I think really helped.
And these mamas are very young women.
Yes.
From either they were previous orphans and had grown up at Kid Ron and were never adopted and then came to work at the orphanage, right?
Yeah.
Or they were from a walkable distance.
Yes. And they ended up living there. Yep.
Okay. So these are the women that make $80 or less.
Yeah, I want to say it's like $50 for them
per month. Yeah. Okay. So I land in Uganda. So you are already in country.
Yes.
You're with another one of our friends. And
then we switched off.
Our friend Jess and I kind of literally switched places at the airport. Like the plane I flew in on, I think she was flying out on. Again, it was very late at night. And I remember thinking, I guess some people would be scared or something. I mean, my husband was like, if you get
normal
kidnapped,
people might be scared.
We don't pay ransoms,
Yeah.
And it just didn't even cross my mind. The second I landed in Uganda, I felt so safe. I felt so close to God. I felt such peace, even on that rocky, broken down Jeep ride. It was amazing. Same story. We get a little bit of sleep. So we went back first thing in the morning to get them. And I just wanted to tell a little bit of perspective. So I was, 37 years old, 36?
Sounds right.
37 something. This is just a few years ago, So I was like 36 or 37. And I walked into the orphanage and every single child that came running up to me said, Grandma, grandmother.
I do not remember this.
Grandmother. And I was dying because at the time I had a 1 or 2 year old that I had left to like go on this trip. And I'm like, grandmother, I am a brand new mother. But if we go back to the statistics that we talked about earlier in Uganda, by all means, I was
late 30s grandma.
I was for sure grandma, could have been a great grandma, and definitely had only a few years left to live. I mean, basically.
Your life's basically over.
My Ugandan life was basically over. The first thing that I noticed we didn't talk about is that the children were in no underwear or diapers. They were trying to be potty trained, but most of the kids would just go and kind of like squat in the bush to be potty trained. And they were all in extra large, tattered clothes and no gender separation of clothing at all.
Wasn't.
All the boys could have been in a dress. I mean, there was a lot of boys in dresses. It was clothes are clothes.
Yeah.
There were no like girl clothes and boy clothes. And I just wanted to say that it's just, that is a harsh reality that we need to face, right? Like clothes are clothes to protect our bodies.
Yep.
And when you are in a poor country in an orphanage, you
could care less about what
care less, right? And having something like a diaper or underwear is a super privilege. And I remember coming back from Uganda thinking, I have never worked a day in my life.
Yeah, I was going to say, what did you think?
Right. Because these women were washing those clothes
over and over. Repeatedly in one day while hanging them, changing the kids, feeding them, taking care of. I mean, it's the most amazing.
Spit up porridge, pee, poop. And they are hand scrubbing on these boards.
Bent over in the hot sun.
Yeah. With a baby on their back.
Yep.
Nursing one baby on the front of them.
Yep.
And doing the laundry.
Correct.
Happily singing.
Yeah.
Happy. And I remember thinking, I am never going to complain about doing laundry again because I don't do laundry. My washing machine does laundry.
Exactly.
There was just a few life-changing kind of pivots. And we had certainly, been in Africa a couple times and seen poverty, but it was a little bit
to a different level.
It was just such a different level. Yeah. The kids at this particular orphanage were very well taken care of.
Yes.
They were very well loved. They were very well fed. Their school was
taken care of because there was a school there in the facility. Yep.
So it's called Kidron Valley Orphanage. And there's a medical facility on site too.
Yeah. And a lot of land so they can grow food.
Yeah. And Pastor John, we actually went out to the sweet potato farm. And again,
we're international soccer players and farmers now.
Yes, farmers. And we were wearing sandals.
Yep,
we learned
pay no mind to that.
Yes. The other women were barefoot, though, without shirts on. And again, nursing their babies with another baby on their back while picking sweet potatoes. And I'm thinking...
And pretty happy.
So happy. So full of joy.
It was a beautiful view there. I remember that. And the sunset was pink and it was awesome.
Oh, my. It was just... The fruit tasted like no fruit you've ever had before.
Yes, the pineapple.
Freshly, and bananas, freshly picked. I mean, one of the most beautiful countries I have ever been to.
Yeah, how do you describe it? I mean, it was like valleys and mountains and hills and jungles and banana trees. And
the Nile River running through all of it with beautiful rock formations and waterfalls. Yeah. I mean, absolutely stunning country. So while we're there, you are wrestling with the decision of what to do. And we go to church on Sunday morning. Because again, Pastor John kind of does it all, right?
He's a
farmer.
pastor.
He's and I remember pulling up and thinking, where's the church? Right?
Yep, that's a normal thought.
Where's the church? I mean, I see all these people dressed up in their finest, beautiful colored clothing, yet still many barefoot.
Yep.
And I see kind of this wooden hut structure.
With corrugated tin nailed onto the sides and roof. And
I'm very confused. And all the children from the orphanage have been driven over.
Yes, in their finest clothing.
I know. And they were
jean
so
jacket.
cute. And we get in there and we have, of course, you have Jordan with you. And then please just tell the rest of the story.
No, I don't even remember. Does this little one waddle up on the side of me?
Priscilla, so Priscilla immediately comes running over and you had been wrestling with, do we add her to this adoption?
And I was praying about it. And it was funny because just at that moment, she arrives and holds her arms up to me.
Hold me.
Yes. I am part of this. Yeah. I am in this family. And I hold her and I had both of them and I have a picture of it. It's my favorite picture ever. And then I think very quickly, though, I could not actually hold and sustain the two of them. And maybe you took Priscilla.
I think Jordan was asleep. So I think I ended up taking Priscilla.
Yeah.
She ate every single snack I had out of my purse.
Oh my gosh, that's my girl.
And then she passed out.
And then she passed out. And then I have some really cute picture of the two of them at the end of the service holding hands, walking away into the sunset together. Yeah. And then I was like, I think we need to.
We get in the car to leave church and we had, goosebump. I mean, it's just so different. I mean, this kind of church is... there's no church in America that I've been to that even resembles this kind of spiritual expression, right? I mean, it was just, and it's hours long. And I mean, it's just beautiful. And we leave.
It is hours long.
And I feel like God gave you that.
The clarity and answer. Yeah.
And especially when we walked out, Jordan and Priscilla are literally, like you said, holding hands, walking out into the sun. And we get in the car and you were like, oh, I have to call Pete. And I'm sure. And you called him immediately and he was like, yes. And then it was there was two.
Yeah. And so then, we doubled.
Yeah. Well, some of the things I want to make sure we get to before we finish up the podcast are how in the world did you afford
Oh, yeah.
to take 2 children on?
Okay.
So like now you're 2.5 years into the process.
Yep.
And you're having these payments, and now
Yep.
you've got a second one. So for anyone who's interested in adopting, let's go through all the creative fundraising that you did.
So it's important to remember that it all comes in phases. Like you don't have to pay that whole sum in one lump sum at once, right? And so if the whole process takes 2 years, think about how much you could save on your own and like pay over time. But then think of all the things you could do as money is starting to become due. And so we've done, and I'm going to name off things maybe that I also know friends who have adopted have done also. You can do, like I've got one friend that would sell barbecue, like do one of those dinners from like a restaurant, and then they got the proceeds from that one night was donated to their adoption. We sold t-shirts. We did a big dinner at a venue, and we sold tickets and had people come, and we auctioned off things from Jinja and had a Ugandan dinner and spoke about the adoption, and that raised, I can't really remember. I want to say $7,000 to $9,000. It's really important to know that you can get grants, and so just write them like crazy. Once you write for one grant, it's pretty much the same information you're going to give, and so find ones that apply to your story and your adoption, and then just keep submitting them, because we got 2 that way. There's different places out there that give different amounts, anywhere from like $500 up to like $8,000. And also it's important to know there's adoption loans that you can get if you get to the very end and you just can't make that last hurdle of like $5,000 or 10. You can get a loan that has no interest for adoption. What else? You can...
Well, one of my favorite things...
Look, what did I do that I forgot?
Well, one of my favorite things is we went down to the market in Jinja, and we...
Oh, yeah, I sold...
So I emptied out my whole entire suitcase, and we filled our suitcases with every piece of goods we could buy from the market. And again, these artists are local, and it's when you're in country, it's really inexpensive to have purchased all of these goods. I mean, I think we had several hundred pounds of
But it's helping
goods.
them in their economy, because like Mama Flo still writes me today and is like, when are you guys coming back?
Yeah.
Because they don't get, mass customers.
And you connected very early on with an incredible artist, Angelo. And Angelo's paintings went like crazy, at least in our area.
Yeah.
And so people were requesting
So we
Angelo's
did art.
paintings. And then we were like, how many, Angelo, we went and met Angelo in a studio. We're like, how many can we buy? Like, how many of these can you paint while
the
we're
next
here?
4 days.
And he did them. He did them for you. And we rolled up those dry canvases and we brought them back. And then
put 'em
you
on
had...
frames.
You had a Ugandan market.
Oh, yeah, we did.
Several times.
I forget because I was still in Uganda one of the times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you were in Uganda. We FaceTimed you, I think. But there was a big Ugandan market that then raised many thousands of dollars.
Church set that up, or like allowed us to have the space. And it was like baskets, jewelry. The paintings alone would sell for anywhere from $300 to $500 at least.
Yeah. There was a woman here recently in our area that was also doing an adoption, and it was around Easter time. And she had offered to drop Easter eggs in everyone's yards, and for like $150 donation, or I'm making up the price, but whatever it was. And there was like 500 people that signed up for this. So then she got all these volunteers
What a good idea.
to like schedule a route. And then so instead of having to stuff your, little listeners, but extra eggs on Easter for Easter egg hunts besides what the Easter bunny brings. So these extra eggs. And she was able to raise almost the entire cost of the adoption. So creativity.
Get creative, because here's something I just remembered. Use the resources you have and the hookups that you do have. Because I remember Pete saying, like, we have some people who are friends that roast coffee. And so we brought back all these Ugandan, I totally forgot about this, coffee beans. And then they roasted them in this special, like, Joe Pre brand, and put them in bags for us. And then we sold that. And here's the most important thing that happens when I say don't worry about the money, it all just works out. I cannot tell you how many people stepped up who I haven't even seen in 20 years and would just send me checks, said, thinking of you, hope this can help. And literally the most amazing part of the whole thing, and I won't say the name, is like one day we just got one of the final bills and we had no more money to give, and it was thousands. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, what are we going to do? And randomly I go into the mailbox, and there is this letter and check from a family member of a good friend from high school who I had not spoken to, I mean, probably since I was a teenager, and said, my wife and I were thinking of you and have been saving up, thought you could use this. And it was thousands of dollars, and was the exact amount and covered the exact payment we needed to make at that time.
Yeah.
And I was like, who does that? People do that.
People do that. People listening to this podcast do that.
You do that.
Yeah. So get creative. Remember that God is good, that people are generous.
Yep.
And
I'm searching for things like that now. Like, people will do this for you. I'm going to go out and be doing this for people who are adopting or similar things.
Yeah.
Because it's just what we need to do.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. So we're going to kind of skip through the mush, but this continues on for you and Pete and Jordan and Priscilla, sadly, for another year and a half.
Yeah, I ended up having to move over there like full time because this minister of gender had, imposed all sorts of laws that now you couldn't do constructive fostering. If you're not living here full time and becoming a citizen, you can't adopt. And they had a time period where they were going to shut down certain orphanages and return kids to the exact spot they were taken from. And so they basically said, if you want to assure yourself that you are definitely getting to adopt Jordan and Priscilla, you need to be here in country having them live with you. So then we did that.
Your company thankfully let you take your adoptive leave early.
Yep.
Right? And then Pete stayed behind with your children.
Yep.
And then you were able to go get Jordan and Priscilla and then live with them.
Yep.
With
this other family in a home that an adopted family had built for this purpose.
Yeah. And it wasn't easy.
It was the hardest thing in my life. Broke me in a lot of ways.
Right. You were alone. You didn't speak the language. And
I wasn't with my kids. I didn't feel like I was married because, I'm not having that daily relationship with my husband.
It was hard.
And I wasn't sure. I kept being told, there's a possibility you're not going to be able to get through court and bring them home.
And people were getting rejected.
Correct. There's plenty of people still living over there who've been trying to adopt for 5-10 years, and I met them all. That doesn't make it easy.
So now your children were not under 24 months old.
Correct.
So they're now like 3.
Yes.
Right?
And I went back and specifically read the law because I was worried, and they said had to be at the time of referral 2 and under, because I really did freak out.
Yeah.
Like,
so it was literally, though, roadblock, perseverance. Roadblock, perseverance.
Yeah.
And at some point, you were in Uganda and it still wasn't happening.
Yep.
And the laws were changing and pushback, and your leave was over.
And I can't lose my job. I need to see my family.
So you had to leave them once again and come back home.
Mm-hmm. And then where do you send them? Because they've been in an orphanage. And what message does that send, sending them back? And again, prayers get answered. And this amazing family that had let us stay in their house, and an amazing family I was living with who was also adopting in the house at the time, said, like, they should stay here. And we have these aunties that work here who they've already become super close with. So
you basically ended up hiring nannies, what we would call a nanny.
Yeah, they call them aunties.
Aunties, to care for your children full time so that they wouldn't have to go back to the orphanage.
Correct.
That they could continue living in that
house. And they
house.
kept going to school, and they could,
Yep, and all that. So then time passes.
Yep.
And one day, you get a call that says,
oh, hallelujah.
4 years later.
Yeah, 4 years.
4.5 years later? 4.5 years later, right?
No, I think it was around 3.5.
With them, though.
Oh, yeah.
Not from the day you started.
And they said, it was hurdle after hurdle after hurdle. Like every time, like at first, they were going to clear everything, and it's all through, the embassy at the end takes a very long time. And then they said, are you sure that that pastor wasn't Jordan's father? You need to make sure that there are no possibilities of family members still being there who are looking for him. So they didn't want to just take the Ugandan DNA test. They needed an American DNA test. So we had to have something flown out of Emory at Atlanta. And it was like thing after thing. And finally the embassy approved Priscilla and not Jordan. So then we were writing letters to our congressmen and trying to get people to vouch for, to push the process along. And I'll never forget when they said, Jordan's been approved. I got the email and I said, wow. And they came home on National Adoption Day, November 17th. Like, what are the odds of that?
Hold on, I have so much. You skipped too far ahead
yeah,
for me. I was like, I
just went
cannot
all
finish
over.
this story, though, without the airport in New York. So now at this point, it's been many months, and it's you guys all have your jobs, and only one of you can go over there.
Correct.
So Pete goes over with some...
With Samantha, my niece, because the process, you can't just go for a day or two and pick them up and come home. You have to go through all of these embassy interviews, and so it takes weeks.
And you have to get
couldn't take weeks off.
passports.
You have to get Ugandan passports for the kids.
Doctor's visits.
Oh,
We
yeah.
have to-
Medical clearance itself was a hot mess, like crazy.
Yeah. And they were recently coming off malaria.
Yeah, malaria, and also, and if they have like a drippy nose, they're like, you can't take them to the U.S. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. So all of this is happening. They finally get through all of it. They get on that plane for the first time with the kids, and they get from Uganda to New York. And just a short flight away from New York to Charlotte, all of your friends and family have gathered at the airport to welcome Pete and Sam and Jordan and Priscilla. And we get there, and all of a sudden we see at the top of the escalator
Like a random stranger.
random strangers holding
Holding a
your
child.
children and bringing them down the escalator.
And Samantha, yeah.
Because I'm dying right now.
Yeah.
Because
We are
we're
explicit.
all assholes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. At the airport in New York would not give up their seat on the flight so that Pete could come home with his children.
Yeah,
Not one person that was flying on National Adoption Day 2018 from New York to Charlotte would give up their seat.
I mean, isn't that just the perfect ending? So my two Ugandan children who have never been on a plane, I mean...
Are now alone. I mean, this is
I don't know
just
why I'm
crazy.
laughing. That's evil.
I don't know. I just couldn't, you know what, jerky people out there, if you're listening,
You're ever, yeah.
give up your seat if a parent needs to fly with their children. So we were all waiting there.
And we had to FaceTime Pete in.
Can I put a video on Instagram of that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So I'll put a video on Instagram when this episode comes out so that
Yeah.
everybody can kind of see the
Who was the
homecoming.
happiest?
It was.
We rolled around on the dirty airport floor. I mean, it was the best.
And it was so rare and random that it was on National Adoption
yeah.
Day,
Who
which
knew?
is what day? I don't even know.
November 17th.
November 17th. Oh my gosh, it's goosebumpy.
And what was funny is randomly, this woman helped Sam bring them down because she couldn't carry both of them. And then later that night, I found out that it was like one of my good friend's neighbors. And they were sitting around that night talking. And this woman was like, I had the most amazing experience today. I brought these children down to an adoptive family. And my friend was like, that's Rochelle.
I'd be like, and you didn't give up your seat on the flight?
Maybe it was a different flight. I don't know.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, maybe they were coming from Chicago.
Yeah, we're going to look past that part.
Yes.
A lot of weird signs and things lined up. So
Co-host over there, she's having a letdown. Do you need to pump? Okay. Well, before you...
it's a birth story
It's a
podcast.
birth story.
It's okay.
Yeah, we're nursing mothers.
Have to pump and pee.
Yeah, okay.
The two P's, P squared.
Because my co-host has to... Oh, there you go.
But wait, was it November of
Last year, 2018. So they've been home 8-ish months now.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And P.S. for everyone, you still have to keep doing post-adoption.
Okay, that was my next
Visits
question.
and reports
So it's
and-
not just like they're yours and your...
Correct.
Oh,
No. And then I'm still in the middle of getting their refinalization paperwork and their name changed. I have their social security and their insurance and stuff like that. And they have citizenship now.
Do you see what's happening with Push here? Is that we're talking about all of this, and as soon as we got to the finale, we're like, you're laying on the floor, rolling around with your babies in the airport, like she's having a letdown because that's what happens when we talk about like beautiful things that bring us oxytocin.
Yeah.
You know, and babies. So now Push over here.
Has to go.
I mean, I
But hold on. Before we get to the pumping and peeing, we have just one more thing I want to leave with. So you and your husband's hearts were so big that you came home and you decided to establish a nonprofit
True.
so that you could help fund this orphanage.
Yes.
And so the name is
Joe Pre.
For
Joe from Jordan, and they call him Jojo there. And then Pri from Priscilla, they call her Priscilla, and we nicknamed her Pri.
Okay, Joe Pri. So if anyone's like listening and loving your story and wants to connect with you, like how does anyone find you?
JoePri.org is where we run Joe Pri out of, but also we're on Facebook, and I think it's Joe Pri Uganda on Instagram.
Okay, so Joe Pri Uganda or JoePri.org. And anyone can learn a lot more about Kidron Valley Orphanage in Jinja, Uganda, can kind of meet these teachers, virtually. And the mission of Joe Pri is to be able to increase the value so that the teachers are paid a living wage, because
so they can stay and keep educating these kids so that they have a chance.
Yeah. And let me tell you that you can get on TV and online and you hear these things and you never know where your money's going. But like, we've been there.
Yeah.
Right.
And our board goes like every 2 months. Like,
yeah.
Amanda's going right now.
We've been there. You've been there for years going through this process. Like Pastor John, these teachers.
Best person I've ever known.
The school. It's an incredible mission.
Yep.
It is to note
and
that
we take
Pastor
people with
John,
us if you want to go and see for yourself.
Yes,
we
I'm
have trips lined up. So
let's do it again. I want to go again. But Pastor John and his wife Barbara, who run the orphanage, are both orphans themselves.
Yep.
And came full circle.
Oh my gosh, I never really
adults.
fully realized. You're correct.
Yep, they were orphans themselves. They came full circle to establish this orphanage.
I'm always reminded of that starfish story, right? Like one matters. Like every single life matters.
Every life matters. And so if anyone is listening to this podcast and feels led to generosity, then please check out joepri.org, and we would love to have you on board. My book
Oh, yeah.
that's coming out, Birth Story, your adoption story is included in it because
Yes.
I wanted to honor it in the book, but a portion of every single book sold is going directly to Joe Pri. And I hope, for the sake of this orphanage, I hope I sell
Yeah.
a million
Come on, people.
copies. 2 million, 10 million
Buy some
copies.
books
I don't
here.
even know. I hope I sell so many copies that I am able to shower this world
Yes.
with generosity, including Joe Pri.
Yes.
Rochelle, thank you for being on. Push. Love ya.
She's dying over there. She's dying. This was really fun.
No,
It was really fun.
That
I'm
was
so thankful.
so much fun.
Yes.
Yeah, I got really emotional. Can I take these off? Are we done?
No,
Oh.
we're saying goodbye to our audience. So
That was
let's just do
great.
this. If you're thinking about adopting, we're going to give you a cheer. Ready? Woo, 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 woo.
You can do it.
Do it. The money will
You can
come.
do it.
The money will come. The money will come. Generosity.
Be creative.
I know. Okay, we're done. Thank you for listening to our international adoption story. And Rochelle, let's go play with those babies.
Yeah.
Mama to 4.
Bye, guys.
Megan, Mama to 5. We got to go
Gotta
let her
pump.
pump. Okay, bye. Thank you for listening to Birth Story. My goal is you will walk away from each episode with a clear picture of how labor and delivery might go, and that you will feel empowered by the end of your pregnancy to speak up, plan, and prepare for the birth you